Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, this is a really, really important day for sex workers everywhere, all over the world. 5 years ago, in 2003, on December 19th, or on December 18th, Gary Leon Ridgway, one of the most prolific serial murders in the United States, was sentenced for murdering over 48 women in Seattle, Washington. He's known as the Green River Killer. On December 17th, the day before he was sentenced, sex workers around the United States came together with an idea that Dr. Annie Sprinkle had. She said, how can we remember these women that have been lost? How can we memorialize the lives of the sex workers that nobody seems to care about? So, on December 17th, we decided to hold a vigil right here on the front lawn, here in Civic Center Plaza, to remember all of the sex workers whose lives have been lost to violence because of a criminalized system that has caused stigma and discrimination amongst us, that has caused society to forget the women and the men and the transgenders that work here in your communities, that are your next door neighbors, that are your brothers, your sisters, your mothers, your fathers. We are here, and we're here today to raise our voices in solidarity around the world, that we will not be forgotten, that the laws, the criminalization of prostitution is bringing violence, discrimination, and stigma upon us. And we're going to speak out and raise our voices together. And one of the biggest heroes, our champion that we've had here in San Francisco is Supervisor Jake Mcgoldrick. And Sex Workers Outreach Project is here today, Erotic Service Providers Union. And we are here to thank Supervisor Mcgoldrick. We're here to lend our support to him and thank him for speaking out against the criminalization of prostitutes all over the world, not just here in San Francisco. So Supervisor Mcgoldrick, we thank you. We thank you for your courage, because we know what kind of political suicide it is to talk about sex or money in any campaign. So we're here to support you and thank you for giving us a voice, giving this place here at City Hall where we can come and speak out against the violence that is begotten against us. Thank you very much, Supervisor Jake Mcgoldrick.
Robin, I have to thank you and the Sex Workers Outreach Project. This is not about me, this is about you. This is about all the sex workers who have been abused, who have suffered violence, who have been murdered, and who have not gotten the kind of protection that our legal system and our law enforcement system should be giving to sex workers.
That's right.
How many more hundreds and hundreds of years need to go by? How many more victims do we need to see before the turning point comes, before the critical point comes, when finally our culture will come to abandon the hypocrisy? And it's a particularly interesting hypocrisy with politicians, because politicians tend to want to use the sex worker issue when it's convenient, to make it look as if they're doing something in the world of vice and moral codes and moral enforcements. Yet when it comes to the exploitation of sex workers, just like when it comes to the exploitation of any workers around the globe, folks go silent, because indeed they don't want to recognize that the fact of the matter is that prostitution has existed for as long as there has been culture, and thank God, because so many people have been able to find the kind of services that sex workers offered and be able to have lives that are acceptable. And we don't have to go on with the kind of hypocrisy that so many politicians have displayed on this issue any longer. The day is coming. If the day is not here today, it might be here tomorrow, but the day is coming. Today is the day, indeed, in terms of the international recognition that violence against sex workers is absolutely not acceptable. Not now, not ever, never has been, and it never will be. The incident that Robin just described, the Green River Killer in Seattle, is just one of so many examples of the kind of abuse that sex workers have suffered. International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers has grown into a movement to end that kind of violence. This event, again, has empowered workers from all over the world to come together and to organize against discrimination and remember the victims of violence who have been sex workers. And say victims of violence anywhere, since we seem to be able to parcel out and see the ones that we want to remember, and often, sadly, see the ones that don't get remembered. All victims of violence have to be recognized as victims, whether they're sex workers, whether they're working in the jungles or the farms, or where they're being exploited all over the world, whether they're working in factories, where they're working in industry. We're seeing that similar kind of exploitation of labor. Violence against sex workers is a direct result of the criminalization of prostitution.
That's
that
right.
point has to be understood.
That's right.
As long as you have a situation where sex workers have to be considered and are considered criminals, they cannot come out and get any kind of protection. As the mayor leaves, I know the mayor there in his car the other day was saying how, prostitution should be kept illegal. I would like the mayor to meet the challenge of trying to finally step up to the plate and finally show the courage required in the leadership of this city to be able to recognize that the time is now. The time is now to decriminalize prostitution. Recently, a judge in Pennsylvania, for example, charged a group of men who had committed a gang rape at gunpoint on a sex worker with theft of services instead of sexual assault. Theft of services. This kind of attitude is a direct result of the stigma and the discrimination that continues to plague our society. The stigma and discrimination perpetuated by the prohibitionist laws that have continued to actually sponsor violence against sex workers. All women can be raped, especially sex workers. Can be raped and you can get away with it because you know damn well that it's very difficult for a sex worker to come forward. We created the St. James Infirmary program here in San Francisco out of our Department of Public Health in order to advance the cause of understanding that the legalization and the decriminalization of sex workers is something that San Francisco should take the lead on. And indeed, the St. James Infirmary, for those of you who might know the song, the St. James Infirmary, is all about the death, the unwarranted, violent death of a sex worker. Indeed, that kind of program that we have here in San Francisco addresses the social issues, addresses the health issues, and addresses the criminal issues. We mustn't be afraid of this issue. Women in prostitution are the number one targets for violence from predators because the predators believe that nobody gives a damn about sex workers and nobody's willing to report them missing, nobody's willing to report them abused. As long as sex workers are criminals, the stigma and discrimination against them will remain strong. Repealing laws against prostitution is the only way to go, which has got to be a first step to starting the healing process. Today, and I finally say, thousands of sex workers around the world are taking to the streets to raise awareness and let the world know that they are human beings that deserve the same rights and protections as every other worker in our society. I thank the sex workers.